Good morning. Welcome to United Israel World Union. This is our 79th meeting. I am glad you all are here and can join me. If you will notice, I am a little dark. Just the way that our lighting is here today, I decided to go with a PDF presentation so that way you guys can see the text. This is it's always tricky when you try to do some sort of textual analysis. So this, I think, is the best format for you guys to see what I'm talking about. So one of the things that we find out with the suffering servant is that Isaiah really crafts something in Isaiah 53 that has been perplexing. It has taken Judaism in one direction, Christianity in another direction. And the question is there any unity? Is there any cogency that can be found in the text to bring unity to both groups of people? And that's what we are going to be focusing on today. So Isaiah gives us a law for interpretation of all Scripture. And if you guys follow my teachings or you have seen, some of my videos, you know that I love this verse, and it's going to be Isaiah 8:20, which is to the law and to the Torah and the adhered, which is the testimony. If they speak not according to these words, there's no light in them. And so many times when we look at different religious movements or different organizations, they will look for some hidden code. They're looking for numbers, they're looking for repeated of certain letters, and it leads you to all sorts of conclusions which really can be manipulated by the input of data. What's interesting when you follow Isaiah's paradigm, it limits you to what's actually written. So you're limited to the text that is written, you're limited to the rules, laws, and the concepts that are established in the written Torah. The other thing that Isaiah had in his arsenal, one of the things that, when we read the Bible, we kind of take it out of its historical context. So you find that with Isaiah, he didn't have the books of Jeremiah or Ezekiel or Zechariah, Zephaniah. Those all came later. So you kind of have to look back. Isaiah had the Torah, the Pentateuch, to whatever form it was at that point in time. He also had the book of Job, he had the book of Psalms, and he had Ruth and a few others. But he didn't have the entire corpus of Scripture that we have today because those people lived after him. So when we go to interpret Isaiah, you want to look at those who preceded him. And that's what we're going to do today. And Isaiah does something really, really crafty with the way that he writes Isaiah 53. And if you don't follow the cookie crumbs, you're going to end up in left field. So are you ready to learn something new? Yes. All right. UIW is really not known. It doesn't put forward any new ideas or new theories, nothing that's shocking or anything like that. So we won't even try that here, right? Oh, no. It's very interesting what Isaiah says regarding the servant. He says that it is something that is going to knock your socks off, something you were so unprepared to hear that your mouth is going to drop open. And we're just going to take a teeny tiny glimpse of that today. Too short to get into it. So here's some rules of the game. Number one, the servant traits come directly from Isaiah's suffering servant song. And this is where the vast majority of the servant traits come from. Number two, they are implied from other laws within the Torah which govern Isaiah's words. So nothing within that Isaiah is going to write is going to violate the instructions of the Torah. Number three, all traits are governed by the chok, or the statutes within the priestly code. And you will find, if you saw my opening, that I said that the suffering servant could really be called the servant from Leviticus. And this is because Isaiah uses so many terminologies, so many specific words that are tied directly to the book of Leviticus, and some of them occur nowhere else in Scripture. So if you don't follow those breadcrumbs, you don't follow those trails, you're not going to solve this mystery. The other thing is some traits are implied. They are implied either, like I said, through the statutes, or they are linked to a specific Hebrew word or even a specific spelling of a Hebrew word. Anciently, there was no codified standards of spelling, and it was more phonetic. So you find that, there was more than one way to derive at a particular name. I think one of the best examples of this is Jeremiah's use of the word King Jeconiah, which that is more of kind of a deliberate effacement of a name, but he spells it in 3 different ways. So you find that throughout Scripture, different words are indeed often spelled different ways. And just for a clarification, I do believe that yesterday Patty did donate like 20 minutes to me. So I may avail myself of 20 minutes. So we're just going to jump into this. We're going to get started with a few things. If you will look at, I handed out a sheet that has the 50 suffering servant traits, and there are indeed 50. You will notice that some are blank. I encourage each of you to look at the text, and I'm going to give you a great resource. Please write this down in your notes. Oh, they're on my face. Thank you. Okay, where should I say? Is that better? Yeah. Thank you. Appreciate that. So the traits that I have on the sheet, the 50 suffering servant traits, I encourage you guys to take this home, research it, and fill in the blanks. See what you come up with. A great resource if you struggle with Hebrew, all you have to do is go to Google, type in the text you want, so say Isaiah 53 verse 1, and then put in Hebrew text analysis. This will bring you to Bible Hub. But the nice thing is that it parses everything for you. It's going to tell you whether the noun is masculine or feminine. It's going to tell you the verb tense. It's going to tell you everything. So that's a great resource. So use that resource, plug in the missing traits for the servant, and then when my book comes out, see how your traits compared to what I discovered. So that's a great thing. So the very first trait, and it's actually 2 traits, is that the servant will deal prudently, but that word there is yiskel. And this yiskel implies a success. It's a wisdom that leads to success. Joshua uses this word in Joshua 1, 7, and 8. And it's used in the way that the law, the Torah, enables it. When you follow it, it causes you to prosper. So there's this idea that you use wisdom, you use this prudency, this yiskel, that it causes you to prosper and to become successful. So the first thing that we find is that the servant is going to succeed in his mission. It is going to reach its goal. The third trait, he is going to become exalted, Yerom and Nisa. These combination of words are used 3 times specifically within the book of Isaiah. And it usually means something. Sometimes it is being extolled to the level of the divine. Sometimes it is criticizing humanity, being extolled to the level of the divine. So it's used in several different contexts. With Moses, you find that God makes him, or Yehovah makes him a god to Pharaoh. He lifts him up, he extols him, and then he makes Aaron his prophet. Does God do the same thing with the servant? Or is it something more like Joseph, where Joseph is lifted up and exalted to be second in the kingdom? The term Nisa is repeated throughout Isaiah 52 and 53 regarding the suffering servant. And whenever a Hebrew text repeats a term, it is emphasizing that term. That's kind of one of the tools in Hebrew, is that when a term is used over and over again, it is emphasizing the servant's exaltation. But there's a little bit of a trick right here. because one of the things that we find with the servant being exalted is how is he exalted or exalted? And we find that he is exalted as an asham offering. So this kind of puts a twist in things. And in the book of Leviticus, this word asham is really, really defined there. It really originates in Genesis, but then you find it's also used in Leviticus. So we're actually going to read this. Isaiah 53:10. Yet it pleased Jehovah to bruise him. He has put him to grief. When you shall make an offering of his soul for sin, and that word there for sin is actually asham, he shall see his seed, he shall prolong his days, and the pleasure of Jehovah shall prosper in his hand. So this is some external force. Now you find with this term nisa, you find that some external force is always lifting something else up. So most often this is used like for the priests when they carry the Ark of the Covenant, they nisa, they carry it, they bear it. But you find that the servant is called an asham, but he is exalted by an external force. Now, it's very important that we become very familiar with the asham offering. First of all, it is a guilt offering. It is usually associated, and just for clarification, most of my research does indeed rely on the research of Jacob Milgram. He is usually considered the most respected Hebrew scholar on Leviticus. And Mr. Milgram finds that the asham offering, it is a guilt offering. It is for delayed purification. So in other words, you commit a trespass and you don't come right away to make things right. You kind of wait around, you procrastinate a little bit, and then you come and you finally make things right. Now this offering specifically has a unique invention to it that is a little bit different than a lot of your other offerings in Leviticus, in that it is required that there is a confession of sin. And then there is also a reparation of payment, which we're going to see in a minute, where you repay the principal portion, and then you're going to add a fifth to it. And one of the things that Dr. Milgram notices is that this is a unique invention, because the repayment, if you have harmed your brother, the repayment to your brother takes precedent over any repayment to God. So this is very much making things right between brother and brother. Kind of like what Patty was talking about yesterday of loving your brother as yourself and having that unity. Making things right, restitution is very important with that. The last thing that you find the asham offering does is it provides healing and purification. So what's fascinating is you're going to find all of these traits of the asham offering in Isaiah 53. So let's just we're going to look at this real quick. This is Leviticus 5, 6, and 7, where you are commanded to bring a asham offering to Yahweh for the sin that is committed. It's usually a female of the flock, but then you can also bring a bird, but then it's divided into two parts if you bring a bird. You also find that the asham is brought, actually let me skip forward here, in verse 17, that even though you may not be aware that you have committed a trespass, if you have violated the law, you've done it. It doesn't really matter if you are aware of it. It's just simply a law of reality. If you've accidentally, I don't know about you guys, but when I've been at Walmart, there has been a time or two where I get to my car and there is an item in my buggy that I have not paid for. Well, if I go home and I don't pay for that item, I have stolen. Now, maybe it was put in a bag and I wasn't aware of it. It doesn't change the fact that I've actually committed theft. Now, you have remedy. You can call them and say, hey, I need to purchase this item, or you can drive back to the store and make payment. So your awareness of your guilt, of your trespass, does not change the reality that you sinned. You have committed an infraction against the law. Now, it's really interesting, and this was actually something that I stumbled across last night because, I try to be real careful with every single word. One of the things that this reparation requires is that you bring this offering with your estimation. And we're going to come back to this term estimation here in a minute in Numbers. So Numbers, I think, gives a little bit better analysis of this. And I'm sorry, my fonts are a little different, but I threw this together yesterday when I saw how well this worked. And it says that with the asham offering, you're going to confess your sins, you're going to make full restitution, and then you're going to add 1/5 to it to give it to the person you have wronged. And so this restores unity and balance in society. You are repaying as well as paying a penalty for the crime or the fraud or whatever egress you have made against your brother. Now, this is where it gets a little bit interesting. In ancient Israel, sin is viewed as contagious. So if that sin is not rectified right away, it is seen as something that can become like a cancer or a virus that can become pervasive again throughout society. And the reason this really becomes an issue deals with the sanctity of that set-apart place. Yesterday, Dave mentioned the theory of constraints. In many ways, that is what that sacred place does. In Israel, you're only as strong as your weakest link. And when society begins to break down, you find that sin becomes accepted. It becomes commonplace. You don't bat an eye that there's adultery taking place. Rather than there being one case of adultery and everybody going, whoa, wait a minute, let's stop. What happened here? Let's help this family. Let's get back on the right path. Same thing with crime and theft. I can use New Orleans as the perfect example of this, where in the last 6 months, we are having something like 40, 60 carjackings a month. The police officers are saying, just go on, don't worry about it. If someone is shot during an altercation, just last week, there was traffic on the I-10. And in stop traffic, a woman was carjacked on the I-10. The police don't bat an eye. It has become commonplace. So the sanctity of this sacred place, where their infractions are very, very much considered egregious and very much dealt with, keeps the sanctity of society. But there's also something else. When that sacredness is observed, Yahweh stays with the community. He dwells with the community. When it is ignored, when people procrastinate, they don't really care to make things right, the ultimate consequence is Yahweh's abandonment, where he hides his face from us and he departs. So all of these are sins that become commonplace. And this procrastination is really tied to the concept of the asham. So it's not and I'm just going to read this, it's not the original sin, but the delay in remedying it. By bringing the offering, the wrongdoer are cleansed. They cleanse the sanctuary from pollution caused by procrastination. And this is really important part of the suffering being an asham. Israel has departed from Yahweh. They really have not returned. They were thrown into diaspora at the Second Temple period, and they have lived in diaspora, and we're still there today. Judah is coming back, part of Israel is coming back, but most of the 10 tribes are scattered across the face of the earth. Now, you find also that this confession of the asham really parallels Leviticus 26 and 39, where we are left to pine away in our iniquities because we haven't repented and returned. But then you find this confession of sin that is mentioned as part of the asham offering, is also reiterated in Isaiah 53, verse 6. So in Isaiah 26, you have, if they confess their sins and the sins of their forefathers that they have sinned. Well, what do the sheep confess in Isaiah 53, verse 6? All we like sheep have gone astray. We have turned everyone to his own way. And Yahweh has laid upon him the iniquity of us all. So we find that the sheep make this confession. And again, this really parallels Leviticus 26, verses 40 and 41, where if we confess our iniquity, the iniquity of our forefathers, and that we have walked contrary to Yahweh, Yahweh has upheld the covenant and walked contrary to us, and that we are still today in the land of our enemies. And this right here begins the healing process. One of the things that Alcoholics Anonymous is really, really good at teaching is the 12-step program. And one of them is a confession. You have to say, there is a problem here. You have to acknowledge and you have to own it. And until you own it, you don't have the tools to correct it. And there's something with this. There's a history here. Because of the fact that with ancient Israel, it's not just us that have sinned. We really have a really bad track record historically. So when you look historically, we have 20 generations that keep repeating the same thing over and over again. And this is why it's important that we acknowledge that it's not just us, it's also our forefathers. Now, the final thing that we see with the asham offering is that by his stripes we are healed. So, and this again correlates with Leviticus 26:42, where Yahweh says, I will remember my covenant with Jacob and my covenant with Isaac and with Abraham, and I will remember the land. We all know 2 Chronicles 7:14, where Yahweh says that, where Solomon says that if you will humble yourselves and pray, then I will remember and I will heal the land. It's not healing the people, it's healing the land. But of course, the people are part of that because they dwell on the land. So here are some things where there are correlations between the guilt offering. The suffering servant is called an asham offering. There is a delay in purification. There's also a delay in the offering and the exaltation of the servant. There's the confession of sin, the sheep confess sin, and then there is the physical healing and restoration. And it's very interesting because this specifically ties to the healing of diseases. It ties to spiritual healing as well as the healing of diseases. And then the question becomes the purification from sin. Earlier today, James was talking about this day where we beat our swords into plowshares, and of course Jono mentioned that as well. Well, all of that comes from us being purified from sin, and the suffering servant plays a key role in this process, but the question becomes how. Now, the suffering servant is an asham offering. Does that mean he's a human sacrifice? This is the way that Christianity has taken it, is that the servant is an asham. He died for the sins of humanity. He's a suffering servant, and he is a human sacrifice. Judaism does something similar, where the people of Israel are the suffering servant. They have been sacrificed. They have been slaughtered through the ages, and they are the servant. But Isaiah tells us we're going to learn something shocking that's going to knock our socks off. And it could be that both theories and that both possibilities are mutually wrong. And Isaiah throws a curveball at us, a really, really big curveball. Because this suffering servant is sick. He is diseased. He is plagued. And this idea is like reiterated, it's either 3 or 6 different times throughout the servant, where he is specifically sick and diseased. Now this word koli, and please excuse my Hebrew, I don't claim to have the best pronunciation, so have grace there. So in Deuteronomy 7:15, Yahweh states that he will take away all choli or sickness, diseases from us, and he will put none of the evil diseases, and there's a different Hebrew word that's used there, but it still means sickness, of Egypt, which you know, on you, but he will lay those on them that hate you. Throughout the Hebrew text, this word choli always means sickness and disease. When Jeroboam the first, when his son is sick, the word there is choli. When Asa, king of Israel, his bowels fall out, it says that he is choli. The editors, scribes, translators only begin to translate this word grief in Isaiah and Jeremiah. But Jeremiah actually says in Jeremiah 10, he says, I am choli, I am sick. So you find that this idea of the servant being sick, it pervades, because in other parts of the Suffering Servant song, it's going to talk about the servant being plagued. And when you go to the Septuagint, those words are even reiterated in much stronger language in the Septuagint than what they are the Masoretic text. The other thing that we find with the servant, and this gets a little concerning, this gets a little uncomfortable, is that the servant is actually blemished. Think about that for a minute. The servant is blemished. He's sick, he's blemished, he's marred, he's mishkat. So with this, what do we know about blemishes in the law? Could you bring an offering that was blemished and offer it? And if you did, what kind of offering would that be? It would be a polluted, a profane, a blemished offering. But that is what Isaiah tells us. He says that his appearance is blemished. He is so marred. His physical features are so distorted. He is grotesque. Now, when I have read through so many commentaries on this. And you will see, well, if this were up, you would see Ross has Robert Alter on here. He has the Hebrew Bible. And Alter states that his physical appearance is absolutely grotesque. You can barely bear to look at him. You know, I think of like Quasimodo or something like that. But he is very much a blemished individual. But it's interesting because it is like this pollution, this blemishing, this thing that makes him an ineligible offering that allows him to sprinkle the nations. Does that feel like a contradiction right there? How? How can this be? And that question of how is where we will one day find the answers. And it is something that really, really shakes things up. Now, the only other place that this word, mishkat, is used is in Leviticus 22:25. And this word specifically bans ineligible offerings due to being deformed or defective. And it's not just offerings that are banned, but also the priests. If the priests exhibit these same blemishes, they are also disqualified from offering for the people. Now, we're going to just read this entire regulation real quick. It says, you must not offer to Yahweh an animal whose testes are bruised, crushed, or torn, or cut. You must not do this in your own land. You must not accept such animals from the hand of a foreigner and offer to them as food to Yahweh your God. They will not be accepted on your behalf because they are deformed or mishkat, they have defects. But Isaiah tells us the suffering servant is defective. He's mishkat. So how do we reconcile that? And this brings us back to the fact that it is this astonishment that we have, this utter astonishment that we have of the servant's blemishes that causes us to be sprinkled. Now here's another word. This word for sprinkle right here, yadzek, is actually zerah. And zerah is only used in Leviticus, actually, let me get my notes here real quick. It only occurs, pardon? It's going to be Isaiah 52, 14 and 15. And then we have Zerah. So we find that this sprinkling is only, the word that Isaiah uses only occurs in the book of Leviticus. And it is used for the sprinkling and purification. So remember I had those question marks regarding the purification of the people and the purification from sin? Well, the suffering servant actually makes that happen. He provokes it. He begins this movement of a love of Yahweh, a love of Torah, and a detesting of sin. But you find that Isaiah 52, which is very much tied to Isaiah 53, establishes this setting for the revelation of the servant. And one of the things that you find is that Israel, scattered among the nations, when we are told to awake and put on strength, we become circumcised and clean. The word clean there is, again, a very Levitical term. And it means that those things that once polluted us, we don't hold on to them anymore. We don't want to be a part of it. And then I'm just going to read these because I think these are really the best verses that kind of present the picture of what we will be after we get through the servant and after we experience what the servant does for us. It says, "Awake, awake, put on strength, O Zion, put on your beautiful garments, O Jerusalem, the holy city. For henceforth there shall no more come unto you the uncircumcised and the unclean." So if they're not coming to us, this very much implies that we've been purified, we've been cleansed. Isaiah 35, verse 8, "A highway shall be there, and a way, and it shall be called the way of holiness. The unclean shall not pass over it, but it shall be for those, the wayfaring men. Even though we may be foolish, we will not err in it." We'll have righteous teachers, righteous leaders who will lead us in the way. And then finally, we have Ezekiel 36, 24 through 25. "I will take you from among the heathen and gather you from all countries and will bring you into your own land. Then I will sprinkle water on you, and you will be clean from all your filthiness, and from all your idols I will cleanse you." So what I will show in my book is how the servant makes this process happen, how he makes us want no one else but Yahweh alone, and how he sees that there is no God beside Yahweh, no God in front of him, or no other deity with him. And it is a very shocking, for myself, I will say that as I study and as I do the research, I'm like going, I'm learning, and then I'm trying to share with you all what I have learned. So this is a glimpse. I focused on the asham. There is a whole nother element to the servant that I didn't get into today, which is its parallels with the book of Job. Job is the original suffering servant, and there are unique terminology that Isaiah uses in Isaiah 53 that only comes from the book of Job, nowhere else in Scripture. So again, to the law and the testimony, they speak not according to these, there's no life in them. So you have to pull from the correct places. And when you do that, it all comes together and it presents a cogent picture. So I hope that this is a blessing to you, that it gives you some insight, and I encourage you to take those traits and see what you can find. Take them home, research them, email me if you have questions, challenge me, and I look forward to the dialogue.